Welcome everybody to the video review for Dead Space 3. This time around we have Dr. Isaac Clarke, who has been living in secrecy on an unnamed lunar colony since Dead Space 2, and he's still investigating the marker threat that began with Dead Space 1. He and Ellie from Dead Space 2 have split up since then, and he's hit up by Captain Robert Norton and Sergeant John Carver, who need Isaac's help to track Ellie and her team down. Jacob Danik, a zealot leader of the Church of Unitology, is hot on their heels as they discover that Ellie is on Tau Volantis, an iced-over marker homeworld. Now here's one thing I want to point out to those who are returners to the series from Dead Space 1 and 2, and I guess this also applies to people who are new to the series. In this particular game, we're normally used to fighting Necromorphs, which are basically these alien/zombie/ mutilated people, come back from the dead, creatures, people who have been, transmogrified into this very demonic alien creature. And they come in various forms. They would kind of remind you more of something that you would see in a movie like The Thing. Now, in this particular game, where, like I said, unlike previous entries where you're typically only fighting Necromorphs, you're fighting the Unitologist soldiers, which is the cult that is a part of the series. They worship the alien technology and the markers, which ultimately brings about the doom that usually comes in the package of the Dead Space games. And they would kind of remind you, I guess, in terms of similarity, they might remind you a little bit of Scientologists, possibly. Maybe this is what we would get if we would, embrace Scientology. Let's not do that. One of the things about the game that is really, I guess, kind of one of the lower points is there's not really a lot of new enemies. Visceral really didn't give us anything in the way of new enemies. I mean, you have a few here and there like this guy, but ultimately, he's really just a modified version of an enemy you've already been fighting for the last couple of games. And easily handled by the probe rifle, which is another issue with the game. And this is something that's a long-running series issue. But in previous games where you could typically get through the entirety of the game using just the one basic default weapon, which was the plasma cutter, you could do that in both games. In this one, not really, but if you have this particular gun, which is, it's the telemetry probe gun, if I'm not mistaken. And it's nothing special. It's the basic gun, and I put some upgrades on it. And as you can see, it pretty much, makes pretty decent work of any enemy. Another thing about it too, speaking of the upgrades, is you can pretty much boost the gun that you have, much like in the previous game, to a higher level. So that way, it's worth it to you to keep it around in those latter stages of the game. But here, this is where kind of getting back to the rapiness of the game. It's like they're just constantly pouring on enemies. Now, granted, this particular portion that I'm playing right now is later in the game. But just the same, it feels like the game has a vendetta against you. Like it doesn't want you to complete it. And it's not like Dark Souls level of challenge, but it's one of those things that, I cursed a few times, while I was playing this game. And like I said, I still think that, while the challenges were there, and I still think that was good, I actually shudder to think what this game would be like on the harder difficulties, and I don't even want to imagine it. Like I said, there was character death right there. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm whining, because honestly, to mitigate the fact that they're throwing this much at you, they actually give you a lot in the way of drops. Look at that. I'm barely midway through the game, and I'm stacked. I'm completely overdrawn on how many things I have. I have way more health than I could possibly need. And even by the end of the game, at the completion of the final, they were literally throwing health at me and ammo like it was candy. And like I said, I'm perfectly okay with that, because truth be told, if you're gonna ramp up the level of enemies, the sheer amount of enemies, then yeah, definitely throw in something to mitigate that. On top of that, with the gun that I was using, I want to say my ammo count was somewhere in the neighborhood of, I want to say almost 2,000 ammo slots. So, I mean, I wasn't going to run out of ammo anytime soon. Like what you see here, this is, I guess, one of the pseudo-puzzles from the game. Nothing really complex. It's a rehash from the second game. Another interesting piece is this one. This is another, I guess, kind of new style puzzle that they added in for this game, which it pops up infrequently here and there. It's not as much difficult, it's just that, I guess maybe for me, since I have a weird thing about, with the analog sticks, and sometimes I forget which one I have where, even though they have them clearly labeled. I mean, they're still, as you can see, margin for error. But I mean, ultimately, still a simple puzzle. One thing I want to touch on too is that they added a pseudo fast travel system into the game. Basically, at certain points you'll find these carts or shuttles, whether you're inside of a space station or outside of one, or on the ground, wherever. And these places where you find these vehicles can basically transport you from where you are now to maybe an earlier or separate part of a facility or planet side. So, like say if you want to go back and maybe see if you can hunt down some of those hidden items or hidden objects, or if there's some optional objectives that you want to touch on or try and get wrapped up so you can, so I guess to satisfy the completionist in you, you have that ability. And now, it's not even really necessary, but I guess if you really want it, it's there. Another returner for the series is the shoot the big boss in the yellow or orange glowy part of their body to get the kill, and you do so, you are rewarded with a boss death. Now, as you see here, what I'm doing, I'm shooting at the yellow bulbous growth on the boss, and I get the desired result for the most part. It's kind of funny, but they even crack a joke about it in the game about how silly it is, or just the logistics of shooting something in a glowy spot on the body. It's one of those tropes in video games that I find kind of hackneyed and overused, and it's something I think that video games as a whole should get away from, but it works here. And hey, if you don't believe me, they're about to make fun of it right now.
Are you shooting the yellow spots? Yes! I think we're just pissing it off! No, it's working!
See? Thought I was lying, didn't you? I mean, ultimately, Visceral didn't really bring us anything new for this entry. At least nothing that really jumps out, which is odd because the series as a whole has always done something new with each entry, and this time it just feels like more of the same old, only without something new to go with it. I mean, it's not a bad thing, though, because, I mean, the game is pretty damn good for what you're getting and very entertaining, so if that comes at the expense of not necessarily getting a technical or a gameplay innovation, I mean, I'm fine with that. And as far as innovations go, like I said, they didn't really give us anything new, at least not on the surface. What they did, they added an element that Resident Evil actually has tried to add in their games over the last few iterations, and I think Dead Space pulls it off a little bit better with this entry. Because where Resident Evil kind of failed at blending action and survival horror together and under one roof, Dead Space was able to pull it off. They traded high suspense and high thrillerisms for more tension, and that's kind of where when I talked about the increase in the amount of enemies comes from, which is why I totally give them a free pass on that one. They made it a lot more tense. They threw a lot more at you, but the thing is, they keep you on your toes, which is a huge part of a survival horror game. And like I said, now to their credit on that end, I think they did an amazing job with that. I mean, like I said, it doesn't always work, but when it does work, it works very well. Like, say here, where I'm messing around with this puzzle. Now, I'm not entirely sure at this moment exactly what's going to happen. I think I'm just going to come down here, flip a few switches, and then be on my merry little way. Much to my chagrin, boom, here you go, I got monsters in my face. And like I said, I was prepared, I paid the price. Now, another thing that we have going on here is that we're touching on something I mentioned earlier with weapon upgrades and the crafting bench, which makes a return to this game, but it's changed a little bit. It doesn't work exactly the same way it used to. Actually, they kind of streamlined it. Like here, what you see me doing, I'm putting upgrades on my weapons where I can get a +2 reload or +1 damage, and even later in the game you can even find some that give you stats like a +2 damage, but they'll take a -1 to your clip, or you can get a +2 reload and a +1 fire rate. You get a wide variety of different ways that you can customize your different weapons, and some of them have more upgrade slots than what another one might have. And I didn't really experiment with this, but I want to say that there's a way you can unlock more for any particular weapon, so you might want to keep your eyes peeled for that. Another thing that you're seeing right now is you can also craft your own weapons and guns, stuff like that. I mean, there's a pretty good list. Some things that are more for co-op, some things that are more for single player, but I mean, you have different options as far as what you can do as far as crafting your weapons. You can craft a Ripper, you can craft a pulse rifle, a seeker rifle. They have some chain lightning guns that you can even craft. Another thing you can do is you can also craft items. You can make health kits, small, medium, or large. You can make your own stasis modules and things of that nature. And I mean, like I said, you don't really have to do any of this stuff, but it's there should you choose you want to do it. Another thing you see me doing here is I'm actually using one of my drones, which is something they added to the game. This actually goes out and seeks out, different items for you, different crafting tools that you need to make all these, various weapons and support items. So, yet again, another good addition to the game. Another thing, too, with the workbench that I didn't bring up before was the fact that you can also store weapons here. So if you want to create a cache of weapons and you don't really want to have to carry them with you, you only get 2 weapon slots. If you want to keep something behind, you have that option, and workbenches are prevalent throughout the game, so you don't have to worry about being left out. Like, see here, one of the things I'm doing is I'm about to craft a Ripper gun, because that was one of my favorite guns from the original and the second game. You just shoot a saw blade out and just let it wreak havoc. But in this game, it's a little dumbed down, and I'm not as big a fan of it as I was before. The probe assault rifle is probably my favorite one in this game. One of the things I want to commend the game for is its use of environment and atmosphere. I mean, they really do a good job of, making you feel isolated, even though they actually have you with a team of scientists and a couple other soldiers. So you should feel like there's not as much of that claustrophobic feeling from the first and second game, where the first one you were completely on your own for the most part, and in the second game you had Ellie. But at the same time, I mean, they still allow you to feel that deep, just utter darkness.
And then what?
Shoot a probe into it, I suppose. My telemetry should light up and we'll have the location of the machine. Finally, something simple, right?
Right.
This is actually one of my least and most favorite parts of the game, when they send you down basically into the belly of the beast, and you're in this necromorph body. And it's just, I don't know, it was really unsettling, because you were pretty much set aside alone. There was no way to get back up to, your friends. You were pretty much just kind of stuck out there, with your ass hanging out. And I really like the way that they set that up. I mean, there's a lot of scenes like this, and a lot of parts of the game where they do make you feel as though you're the only one there. And you get that claustrophobic feeling all over again. I mean, a lot of people have gone off and ranted and raved about how, they lost touch with the feeling of the game. And, well, they added too much action and messed up the progression of the story and the tension. But I don't really feel that. I feel like they did a good job. I mean, it's moments like these that really, really just had me jump, where I was like, man, I don't know if I'm gonna make it out of this, Another thing that I thought was really cool about the game is just the overall atmosphere and the creepy things that you see. Like, sometimes you come across a dead soldier every once in a while, or somebody that's dying, and it's like they're in the middle of their death, and it's like, oh god, that's messed up, Or you walk into a room and it's one of those moments where you better be quiet or not do anything to rattle the enemies, because there's certain enemies who can't see you, they can only hear you. And you're trying to like direct them in different ways and maybe lead them somewhere else, so that way you can sneak past them and not have to worry about being accosted by them. And I mean, there's moments like that that are just really full of tension. So there you go. Usually these particular enemies can't really see you, but if they get close enough to you, or if you shine your flashlight on them, they'll spot you. Another thing too is, graphically, the game holds up pretty well. The textures look really nice in it. They do a really good job using the snow and the fog to kind of obscure things, so you can't really see what's coming. They use darkness and light very effectively. I mean, the character models look great, and this is one of the better looking games out right now, and the best looking game in this series. I'd even say one of the better looking games to come out this year so far. And kind of going back to the character aspect of it, I want to say the characters are done really well this time. Not that they weren't done well in the previous games, but in this game they did a very good job with it. I felt like, they really sold me. I mean, they brought back Gunnar Wright. He returns as Dr. Isaac Clarke. And this time around, he's even more tortured and unhinged than he was in the last game. And you could tell he's had a really rough go of it. I mean, Wright does a great job selling this to you and really keeping you invested with his struggle. And you easily understand his reluctance with being involved in this marker business again. Yet you believe in his resolve in accepting the situation and just going ahead and going with it. Sunita Henry returns as Ellie from the last game, and she also does well at playing the one who, despite going through hell in the last game, she's really one to set things right and end the marker threat, even more so than Isaac. I kind of got that impression. You can feel the tension between the two characters, and she still remains as likable, if not more likable than she was in the second game. I also thought that Ricardo Chavera did a really good job as well. He's a longtime cast member of Desperate Housewives, and he also did some voice acting on the Dead Space Aftermath movie. He plays the co-op character Sergeant John Carver. And I thought he did a really good job in his role.
We gotta keep moving.
Now there are only 4 of us left. I can't do this.
Then we leave you behind. If you can't keep your head, you're a danger to everybody.
You're horrible.
Nobody's leaving anybody. Now come on. Let's get to the top of this mountain. Together. Together.
Another actor that I thought worked really well in this was Simon Templeman, who many of you may recognize his iconic voice as the vampire Cain in Legacy of Kain. And he's really good in this. He's not around as much as one would probably like, but he plays the villainous and delusional Unitology church leader, Jacob Danik. And he plays this guy to perfection.
Testing. 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 Hello, Isaac. I know you're out there, crawling around. You probably think I'm an overzealous crusader. I'm mindlessly following the whim of an angry god. It's an easy conclusion to draw, and I don't fault you for it, but you may be surprised to know that I'm a man of science. A man of fact and reason, cause and effect. And soon, you'll understand that I'm right. About everything.
Look, the story of the game is fairly convoluted, but it's nothing new to those who are fans of the series. To newcomers, you'll be lost, and understandably so. I mean, this game does its best to get you up to speed at the beginning, but ultimately, you do kind of need the experience of the previous 2 games to really be as invested as anyone else would probably be. I mean, it's not a bad thing, because, I mean, it is, after all, a 3rd entry, and, I mean, and I gotta ask is, why the hell haven't you played Dead Space 1 and 2? Really, just kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty, I believe Dead Space 3 is a must-play at full pay. I mean, there's plenty to do in the game, and it's got a very long solo campaign to it. I mean, it can even be played as a co-op campaign. I got about 20 hours with it, and that's just me playing solo, and that's minus me doing all the optional objectives and all the hidden item hunting. And once again, I'll say, while Visceral didn't do anything particularly new with the series or reinvent the survival horror wheel as in previous entries, I feel it's plenty to sate the appetites of Dead Space fans, survival horror fans, as well as the uninitiated alike. I think there's a very good game here, and I feel like it's one of those, especially if you want something that to give you a good scare, if you're still missing out on that survival horror fix that Resident Evil 6 promised you last year that you didn't get, this is a viable alternative and a very good one. I mean, we don't get a lot of games in this genre of survival horror very often, and this one's a good entry.
It's happening again. Everyone's dying around me.
We're the only hope of saving our entire race.